Okay, so now we have talked all about motor skill development in those first 2 years, but let's talk about the role of practice in this motor development. So we learned the technical stuff of how development occurs, the milestones, but what about the role of experience here? Does practice influence motor development, or is it largely biological and universal? So let's look at some case studies of different cultural practices in this area. So first, traditional Hopi families in the Southwest US. So these families, they keep babies tightly swaddled and strapped to a cradle board like you see in the image here, and they keep them like this for the first several months of life. They're really only unwrapped from this cradle board a couple times per day for, changing and things like that. So it allows very little movement of their arms and legs and essentially no practice to move around and exercise their motor skills. Um, but compared to less traditional Hopi families who did not use these cradle boards all day, the two groups did not really differ in the age that they began to walk. So if we compare these traditional Hopi families to non-traditional families, there wasn't a lot of difference either way in when they started to walk. So this is evidence that suggests maybe basic motor skills may not depend on early practice for its development. Maybe there is a universal element there, biological element, where practice doesn't play that strong of a role. But let's look at some other cases to see more of the picture here. Next, we have the Kipsigis families in Kenya. Now, these families actively teach their babies to sit up, stand, and walk shortly after birth. For example, they will seat babies in shallow holes in the ground to support their back in sitting up, and repeat this until the babies can sit up well on their own. They begin training for walking around 8 weeks old, so around 2 months, so very early on. And how they do this is their babies are held under their arms with their feet touching the ground and gradually propelled forward. So the outcomes here of this very early training is for sitting, they sit 5 weeks earlier than US babies on average. And for walking, they're 3 weeks earlier than US babies on average. So pretty significant in how much earlier they're achieving sitting up alone and walking alone. So this evidence suggests that practice can affect age of milestones. Maybe it does affect the age that babies reach these motor milestones, depending on the culture they're in, right? Now, what about the Ache families in Paraguay? So children under 3 years old in these families, they spend 80 to 100% of their time in direct physical contact with their mothers. They're really almost never more than 3 feet from their mothers. They're often being carried too. So this stems from cultural practices. In their culture, they tend to make camps in rainforests without clearing roots, trees, bushes, or anything like that. They leave things as they are, which carries some risks, right, for the child, their safety. So as a consequence, the mothers carry their children and keep them close for safety reasons in these first 3 years. What is the impact here? Well, these Ache infants, they are much slower than US infants in acquiring basic motor skills. They begin walking about 23 months old, so almost 2 years old, compared to almost 1 year old in US children. So this is almost a year difference compared to US children and when they're starting to walk independently. But at around age 5, when it's deemed safe to explore independently in these communities, the Ache children, they spend many hours doing complex motor activities. What is the result? They become very skilled at things like tree climbing and cutting vines while balancing high above the ground. These are very advanced skills for a 5 year old and actually really exceeds the motor skills of many US children. So it's kind of a trade-off. There's more of a delay in their walking, a pretty significant delay, but by 5, they're already surpassing US children in many ways in their motor skills. So this further illustrates the complexity of the role of practice in motor skill development. So I wanted to paint a few pictures for you about different cultures and how they approach, you know, child rearing and how they carry children and what they teach children in terms of motor skills. But lastly, let's talk about the Back to Sleep campaign, which we talked about a little bit last time. So as a recap, the Back to Sleep movement or campaign, it's encouraging parents to put their infants to sleep on their back instead of their stomach. And this was to reduce the SIDS rates, and it actually was effective. It vastly reduced the rates, chopped them nearly in half, which is great. But one unexpected event or effect, sorry, is this back to sleep movement, having infants sleep on their backs, being normalized. It actually delayed the onset of crawling by up to 2 months. Why is this? Well, babies were getting less time on their stomach, which actually promotes crawling earlier because it's a natural, uh, you know, thing that precedes crawling. If you're on your stomach, that's kind of the one of the positions that crawling is in, right? You're facing downward, right? Your stomach's down. So it was kind of a natural predecessor to crawling. But since babies are spending more times on their backs now to prevent SIDS due to this campaign, they're actually being delayed in their crawling rates. And that's why now we see a lot of pediatricians promote tummy time. So during active waking hours, they promote that you put your baby on their tummy and have them have tummy time. And many babies do not like tummy time. I'm sure many parents can vouch for that, but a lot of them have a pretty big hatred toward it. But a lot of pediatricians recommend it to have them spend this time, at least a little bit, per day or per week, to offer more opportunities to practice pushing themselves up and eventually leading to crawling. So tummy time has been shown to promote crawling, rolling, and sitting at earlier ages. So just another example of the role of practice, in this case in the US perspective. So in conclusion, both nature and nurture play a role. They seem to be involved with the development of motor skills. And regardless of cultural practices, babies will eventually achieve the milestones, but they'll do so at a pace that aligns with their culture and whatever the culture entails. So there's no better or worse, no right or wrong. It's going to align with the culture that they're embedded in, right? So that's how we're going to end the day. But I wanted to just show you a few examples of how the role of experience can play a role in motor development. So that is it for today's content. So thank you for joining, everyone, and I will see you next time.